Hi, and welcome back to my channel, Quest for Faith with Brian. And today, being the end of Advent, coming up on the Christmas season, I thought it'd be a great idea, no better than to actually go to the Nativity and get a tour of the Nativity and check out the city of Bethlehem. And who better than to actually walk us through this, the Nativity, the people who were there, the sights, the places, than Jerusalem Jones himself, Steve Ray, who's Steve, thank you so much for coming back on my channel. I really do appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk with you. And I know you're always busy, so I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Brian just got home late last night. I don't know when this is going to air, but from my grandson's wedding. We have 20 grandkids, and this is the first one married, and another one's getting married in June. Kind of makes you feel a little old.
Just maybe, right?
This isn't sons getting married. This is grandsons getting married.
Yeah. I mean, that's so fantastic. You sent me the picture, and I saw you posted it on Twitter too of your whole family, and I'm like, that's the dream, to just be surrounded by
Yeah,
offspring. I just
I
think
think
that is so cool.
that's the meaning of success. It doesn't mean having millions of dollars in the bank or having a big house or something. It's having family like that, and all of them love the Lord, and they're all wonderful, great kids, and they're getting full rides at universities. I've got 6 grandkids in the universities now. All of them got scholarships because they're so sharp. I mean, I'm bragging a little bit here, but even
Hey,
the grandson who's got married is in law school. So is his bride, and they both have a full 4-year ride because of their grades and their qualifications.
that's
So,
amazing.
yep.
Yeah,
So,
I've come from a pretty small family. It's my sister and I have two first cousins. That's it. Where my wife has 35 first cousins. But
yes,
it's like her
yeah,
immediate family is really small. Like her brothers and sisters never had kids. And so it's like we pine for that, for like the big family.
yeah,
So I'm leaving it all on my youngest son Joseph. I'm like, come on, buddy.
yeah.
I, I need you to marry a good Catholic girl when you're young and have 7 or 8 kids, and then that way we can eventually have the
That's good.
big Christmases.
Well, speaking about births and
Yes,
kids, Mary didn't have a great big family. She just had one son, but he was a pretty important one.
for sure. Yeah, so let's where do you want to start off with the nativity? I know,
Well, let's just say
set
let's
the
do
stage.
a quick virtual tour of they leave Nazareth, which is a small town, and they would probably need to go with a caravan because it's dangerous to travel alone, and we know that people traveled in caravans even when Jesus was left behind in the temple. We know that it says that at the end of the first day, when Joseph and Mary came back together, men and women travel separately at that time, and they came back together and they looked for Jesus among those who were traveling with them. By the way, that's the only time the word synod is used in the Bible. The
Hmm,
group, they searched among the group. That word is actually in the Greek means a pilgrimage group that are traveling together. So they would have been in a caravan traveling probably with other folks, and they would have probably gone down from Nazareth along the Sea of Galilee to the southern tip, and then followed the Jordan River all the way down. The reason being is if you go straight through, you go through Samaria, like
that's
Jesus
a
did when he met
no-no.
the women. And not only is it a no-no because of the people don't they hate the Jews, but also it's all mountains. Whereas if
Okay,
you come down to Jordan Valley, it's a long, straight, flat stretch, and you've got fresh water the whole way, and it's
gotcha.
warm. It's warmer down there. And then they would get to Jericho, which is right on the Jordan River, the lowest city on the face of the earth, by the way.
Hmm,
And then they start climbing over 4,000 feet up the mountains into Jerusalem. My guess is they would have stopped at the temple along the way to pray and maybe even visit Zechariah and Elizabeth, who lived just a few miles outside of Jerusalem.
yep.
And Mary stopped by and said, hey, Elizabeth, remember when I stopped by 9 months ago and I told
Yeah.
you, look at now, look at now. Anyway, then they would have gone the last 4 miles into Bethlehem. We don't know if she was on a donkey or not. The Bible doesn't tell us, but she either walked or she had a donkey. And I think if it was my wife, I'd have given her a ride on a donkey. There's a
Right.
second century document called the Proto-Evangelium of James, and the early church gave it great credibility. And it's where we get the names Joachim and Anna, and where we get the story of the presentation of Mary. That all comes from that second century document. And in that document, it says that Mary was on a donkey. So we
I didn't
don't
know
know
that's
that.
where we got that from.
Yep, that comes from that document. She was
Okay.
riding on a donkey. Interestingly enough, it also says that Joseph was a widower, and he had other sons and daughters through a previous marriage, and he's a widower, and one of his other sons led the donkey. So that would have been one of
Hmm.
Jesus's stepbrothers,
Right.
which is a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. It's very interesting.
Right.
Anyway, so they would, as they're entering into Bethlehem, they would have noticed a tomb on the right hand side. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about in the list. So I won't talk about it now, but it would have been a wake up call for Joseph. It would have been a little bit trepidation when he sees that tomb, and we'll discuss it in a minute. And then they would have arrived in Bethlehem, and I think it was probably a donkey traffic jam, main intersection, because a lot of people were coming for the census and to Bethlehem, and there's donkeys going the streets are full of them. And then Joseph finds a cave with a manger in it, which means it was for animals, and Mary gave birth there. So that gives us kind of and remember, she's only a young girl. She's probably
Yes.
the most
13 at the
historians,
youngest, 15 at the
youngest,
oldest.
16, 15, 16. I usually land on the age of 15. That's a good age to be. It explains also that if she was in the temple, was dedicated to the temple, as the whole feast of the presentation of Mary, she's presented in the temple, kind of like Samuel was.
Mm-hmm.
And she would have been able to stay there until her menstrual cycle started. And then she would have been rendered ceremonially unclean, probably 12, 13 years old, moved up to Nazareth. And then all of this happened right after that. 14, 15 years old, she's betrothed to Joseph, probably because Zechariah and Elizabeth were probably dead by that time, which is why she may not have visited them in Jerusalem, but because they were older already. They were an aged couple. So my guess is that Joseph would have betrothed her as a family to take care of this young girl who is now an orphan. And so now we have she's probably 15, betrothed, but not yet married. And the angel comes and gives her this announcement. And the next thing 9 months later, they're on their way to Bethlehem. So that gives a little background.
Yeah, for sure. And I always find it I loved when I started looking into Mary, when I is learning all that background information. I didn't realize the donkey was from the event, or what's the document called?
Proto-Evangelium.
Proto. I always mess up Proto-Evangelium of John.
Yep.
Because I know that's where we get a lot, where we get Anne, and we know about Saint Anne and everything.
Actually, it's a Proto-Evangelium of James. I think I made a mistake saying John.
Yeah,
And
James.
Proto-Evangelium just means the first good news. And it was one of the brothers of our Lord that it's alleged to have written it, but it probably went through several redactions. But anyway, people should read that. It's a very significant, interesting document, and the early church gave it great weight. They studied that.
Yeah.
It's like it supplemented the Gospels, and it was read and studied and believed long before the New Testament was ever put together.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And and that close too, like you would have had somebody that either knew, or people that knew of all the Mary and her story, right? Like it's not like it was written in the 4th or 5th or 6th century.
Oh no, it was written in. Most scholars think it was written in the first half of the 2nd century. Well, remember the Gospel of John wasn't written until about 100 AD, so still it's very close. But those traditions carried on, and then it was written down. So
yeah, perfect.
Anyway, so now I have the title of this is People and Things at the Nativity.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did is I thought it would be kind of interesting. There's a lot of things swirling around. It's not just Mary and Joseph going and having a baby, and then they go back go to Egypt. But there's a lot of things swirling around, a lot of aspects. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of things involved. And I came up with a list of 20. There may be more, but I came up with a list of 20, and I guess we're going to try to cover those today.
Yeah.
Doesn't give us much time for each one, but it's we can do it.
Right.
And I think people find it interesting.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to. I know you sent me the list and I looked over it, but I'm loving to hear a little more detail on it. So yeah, let's start diving into it.
Okay, well, first of all, the thing involved is the city of Bethlehem. Let's deal with that first. It means house of bread, and it has a long history. In fact, I call it. Sometimes I give a talk called the birthday cake of Bethlehem, because if you took the levels of history involved and you slice it like a piece of birthday cake, you can see all the layers of cake and frosting and cake and all the different levels of history. And it starts with Rachel and Jacob going through, and Rachel dies on the way through. Then you have Ruth, who has her own 4-chapter book of the Bible. Ruth, she marries Boaz. Boaz and Ruth have a baby called Obed. Obed has a son called Jesse, and Jesse has a son called David.
Yep.
So now we come to the next level of Bethlehem after Ruth, and that's the shepherd boy David, who kills Goliath about a half a day's walk in the Elah Valley. I have on my desk right here a bunch of stones from the brook where David got his smooth stones to kill Goliath. So that's David, and then he becomes the king. And then in 800 years before the birth of Christ, we have the prophet Micah, who says, "Oh, you Bethlehem, who are too small to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth the king." So everybody knew that the king was going to come from Bethlehem. So that's the next layer of the birthday cake. And then we have Jesus being born. That's the next layer of the birthday cake. After that, you have people starting to come and visit. For example, St. Jerome lived in the cave where Jesus was born and translated the Hebrew and Greek texts of the Bible into the Latin Vulgate, which is the official. That was translated in the caves where the baby was born.
I couldn't think of a better location to do that, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And then the next levels of history is all these pilgrims come, and I have a book up here of all the early writings of the early pilgrims that went through the Holy Land. And then the last level is the birthday cake, is when I drive in with my bus and I say to everybody, now you're the next level of the birthday cake. You are pilgrims number 102,163,000. That's you're in that list. So so Bethlehem is the most important. It is the place where even from 800 years before, the prophets said that's where the baby was going to be born, who would become the ruler of Israel. So the first one is Bethlehem. That's the first person or thing that we're going to deal with. Now, I mentioned Rachel's tomb, and then I'll talk about this, and then I'll shut up so you can jump in. But the Rachel's tomb, this is interesting because if you don't know the Holy Land and you haven't traveled, you don't know the proximity of places and the location. And so Joseph is on his way into Bethlehem. Nobody thinks of this who doesn't know and hasn't been there to see how close it is. But as he's going in, he would have noticed a tomb on his right-hand side. And it's still there today. If you want to see it, watch my David and Solomon movie I made, because we go into this tomb. It's a synagogue now, a Jewish synagogue. But it's called Rachel's tomb, and it's near the entrance of Bethlehem. And Jacob, 4,000 years ago for us, 2,000 years earlier for Mary and Joseph, Jacob was traveling through Jerusalem, through Bethlehem, down to Hebron, and finally to Beersheba, down in the Negev desert where he lived. And Jacob, he was obviously Abraham's grandson. Mm-hmm. And along the way, his wife Rachel was very pregnant, just like Mary is very pregnant at the same point in time and at the same point in place. And Rachel gets off her camel and she gives birth to her son Benjamin, and then she dies. She dies in childbirth, and they bury her on the side of the road. 2,000 years later, they still remember where she is. There's still a tomb there.
Wow.
In fact, 800 years after that, now consider this, the children of Israel have gone into Egypt for 400 years. You would have think they'd forgot where grandma was buried, right?
Right.
Most Americans have no idea where their great-grandparents are buried.
True.
They bury her, and then they go into Egypt for 400 years. Then 40 years wandering in the wilderness. So now the 350 years they come back in the land. 800 years after her death, King Saul loses his donkeys. He goes to the prophet Samuel and he says, "Can you help me find my donkeys?" Samuel says, "Go to the tomb of Rachel and you'll find your donkeys." They still remembered 800 years later where Rachel was buried. This is the Jewish and the Eastern mind. They don't forget things
Yeah,
like
they
that.
don't. I mean, even like the well of dang it. It was
Jacob's well.
Jacob's well. Like they know where all these places still are. They
Yep.
don't forget where important things happen. And even
In fact, we take our groups to the well of Jacob. It's up in Nablus, kind of a rough area to go to right now because of the conflict, but
yeah.
it's there. So they remember those things. Excuse me, I got a cough this week. But Joseph, don't think that he didn't look over and see that tomb and say, "Oh, she died in childbirth. My wife is now in childbirth, and I'm here. Oh God, please protect my baby, this baby of ours."
Right.
And people would say, "Oh no, they don't have to worry because this is a special baby. God has plans for him. It's the Son of God." Well, then why did the angel wake Joseph up in the middle of the night and say, "Quickly, quickly, Herod's going to kill the baby. Flee to Egypt." Of course, there was danger. Of course, there was risk, and Joseph was a protector. So he looked over at that tomb. I'm sure that he prayed and
You
asked
couldn't
God to
help
protect.
but think that, you know?
Oh, of course, absolutely.
As-
Well, so that's the second thing in Bethlehem. The next two are, of course, Joseph and Mary, but it's Mary is 9 months pregnant. How far is it to Bethlehem? How far did they travel? It's 100 miles. Bethlehem
I
is a
didn't
hundred
realize it was
miles
that
from
far.
Nazareth. So by the time you leave Nazareth in the north and you come down through the Jordan Valley and you go up 4,000 feet, you have to, in 20 miles, you climb over 4,000 feet up to the top of Jerusalem and then across to Bethlehem. This is 100 miles. And it would take at least 5 days from sunup to sundown. They don't have Holiday Inns and Hilton hotels along the way. It's
Right.
a rustic trip for a girl who's 9 months pregnant. So Mary is one thing I say is that if anything, Mary was one tough little Jewish girl. We
Yes.
sing the song "Gentle Woman." I say baloney. You could sing "Tough Jewish Woman."
Yeah.
She was, and then after the baby's born, they go to Egypt. That's another 250 miles through the Sinai wilderness.
Right. No, and I mean, like, I mean, geez, my wife would never. I mean, I think she could do it. I'm not throwing shade on my wife here, but she wouldn't want to, and she would
No.
complain, and she'd be very mad the entire
And can you
trip.
imagine 9 months pregnant riding on a bony backed, bouncing, rude donkey? I mean, it's not the way to go to give
No.
birth. And then you have Joseph, who is a wise and I believe an older man. I'm not saying ancient, but older man who is in charge of taking care of her. And I know there's a big debate whether he was young or older, and
Right.
I'm not going to get into that debate. I can, but I'm not going to. And I believe that he was an older man, very
I lean
mature,
towards that too.
yeah, and able to take care of her. And because he's of the tribe of David, and remember, those people, they're very tribal. They even are today in the Middle East. That's one of the things Americans don't understand about the Middle East. We try to bring them democracy. We forget that they're tribal, and
Right.
that democracy doesn't work among tribal people, at least without a long time of preparation. Well, anyway, Joseph, he's the caretaker. Also, let's remember they weren't immigrants. A lot of people are trying to say that they were immigrants and migrants. They weren't. They were, even when they went to Egypt, they were still in the Roman Empire. It was not like they went to another.
Right.
They were in the Roman Empire, and they went to family and friends who. There was a Jewish community there in Egypt, and that's where they stayed. I've been in the grotto cave where they lived when they were in Egypt. It's in outside of Cairo. Well, so you got Mary and Joseph. That's 3 and 4. And then we come to the donkey. Now, the Bible obviously doesn't say there's a donkey, but in the Proto Evangelium it says, "And Joseph saddled the donkey and set her upon it, and they led the donkey to Bethlehem." That's what the Proto Evangelium says, that Joseph got a donkey, set her upon it, and they led her to Bethlehem.
I'm
And
laughing here with that, just thinking of just me as a Protestant sola scriptura, and that we
yeah,
always would do the depiction with the donkey and to find that it's not biblical, right? Like you wouldn't think about it, right? It
it
was
comes
just
from tradition. It's a tradition.
yes,
And not only that, but here's a funny thing too, Brian, is my mom and a lot of people you'll hear criticize the Catholic Church for having the crucifix with Jesus still on it. And they
Mhm.
said, Jesus isn't still on the cross. You Catholics keep him on the cross. He's not on the cross. He's in heaven. And I said to my mom, yeah, and you have a manger scene here on the table. It's Christmas, and Jesus isn't in the manger anymore either, Mom.
Right.
So
Right.
anyway, so the donkey is an interesting aspect because I'll tell you, I've ridden donkeys many times in Petra and in Egypt and in Israel. Down the Jordan Valley, I've ridden donkeys. If you want to see it, you can watch my movie on Mary, Mother of God. I'm riding a donkey. Donkeys are stubborn. They're not always friendly.
Nope.
They try to buck you. See, I was raised with horses, and with horses, you kick them in the ribs and they go. Well, I got on this donkey and I kicked him in the ribs, and he didn't like that. That's not how you make a donkey go. And he starts bucking, and he turns around and bites my leg. And I just think they're evil beasts. And to think of Mary
Well, that's why
driving,
you have donkeys to protect herds. You know,
that's true.
like
That's true.
that's why you put them out there with a sheep because they'll go attack anything that's coming up on
Yep,
anything
they
else.
sure
Yeah.
will. So there we've got 5. So we're 1/4 of the way through.
Yeah, I think I don't know. That just struck me with the donkey because it's just I never thought about where does the donkey come from, and there's so many movies out there, right? Like my kids love that movie, the Star. Have you seen that
Uh-huh.
cartoon movie? I mean, it's a great little movie, but it's funny with these little things that are part of the tradition of the Christmas season, and that you've always Protestant or Catholic, whatever you've always grown up with, and, and to hear like, yeah, no, that came from that wasn't from the Bible, and I don't know why I never that never clicked until you just said
Yep,
that.
yep,
It's not like I haven't read, you know, it
right.
never says anything about a donkey, but yeah, it makes sense,
And it
But
never says
anyways,
anything about being 3 wise men either. We don't know how many wise men there were, but we'll get to that one. That comes up
okay, all
later.
right,
Well, the next thing that we can talk about, number 6, is the cave. That's another thing related because they don't houses and fancy buildings just were not part of the landscape back in those days. In fact, where they're leaving Nazareth, it's 25 caves, and they all lived in caves. And they would build a facade. And people ask about the Holy House of Loretto. It's probably the front part of the stones that Joseph would have built in front of the cave and put a door in it. That's
mm-hmm.
the way they would do it. In fact, when I take my groups today to Shepherd's Field, where the shepherds were on the first Christmas Eve, we have mass in a cave where the shepherds were with their sheep, and that cave holds 100 people. That's where we have our mass.
Wow,
And but they built a stone front to it and a door. See, and this is what Joseph, especially being a builder, a
makes sense.
carpenter, would have put that. So there's a lot of caves even in Bethlehem today. When I've done our filming, we went out into south of Bethlehem, maybe 5 or 10 miles, and we found caves out there. And many of them still had Bedouins living in those caves, and they have their animals living right with them in the cave.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very primitive, but this is the way people lived. Now, the fact that there's a manger, which means a food dish for sheep. I was raised on a farm. We had mangers. We'd throw hay and oats and corn in there. So it implies or gives us a indication that this was a place where animals lived. So the cave, when you go there today, you go across a manger square in Bethlehem, full of vendors. They're trying to knock you over, get to buy all their cheap rosaries and nativity scenes and things. And so then you go stoop through a little door, and the little door in the Church of Nativity it used to be a big door, but the Muslims used to ride their horses in and use it as a stable. So the Franciscans, they built a small door and said, okay, that's enough of that. So now you have to stoop to go in this little door.
A practical solution to an issue. I
Right. And
like
there's
it.
no door that opens. It's just a stone entrance into this
Yeah.
church. And then you go down a stairway into a grotto and you touch a 14-pointed star after you wait in line for 2 hours. Oh, by the way, in March, we're hoping to take a group and in March of this year, and there will be nobody else there because everybody will be afraid to go. And we will have no lines and no crowds. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's anybody that's interested. let me know. Anyway, so then the cave, when you go down those steps, you are entering the original cave. And we know it's a cave because the early pilgrims wrote about it being a cave. Jerome lived in the caves where the nativity took place. Queen Helen came in 325 and built a church over the cave where Jesus was born. So it was a cave where animals were kept, very unsanitary place to give birth to a baby, but there was nowhere else to go. Later, we'll find out that they moved to another location, but we'll wait. That's coming up here. Now, number 7 is, I call it the midwife, because you didn't have hospitals back then. You couldn't go
Right.
to the clinic. And in the Proto Evangelium of James, again, we read that Joseph found this cave for her and then went out to find a midwife in Bethlehem to come and assist Mary with the giving of the birth. And even when Rachel, we talked about Rachel dying in Genesis 35, 2,000 years earlier, it says, and when Rachel's labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, do not fear, you have another son. So even Jacob, when he was traveling on caravan with his camel and his families, they had a midwife that was there
Which would
for
make
Rachel.
perfect sense because, like, I mean, even like even reading stuff from 200 years ago, the United States frontier, there would be get the midwife here. Like
Right.
it's just been, and like even going back just a minute with people living with their animals up until modern times, that was kind of normal. It got too
It was.
cold. Let the cattle, let the sheep, whatever we got there, they're going to come in the house so they'll survive the winter, or we can protect them that way. That was literally how people lived until this modern time,
It
and
is exactly.
we're only 100, I'd say 100 years out of that. Like I even
You're
think that was
absolutely right.
probably happening
Yep.
80 years ago in some
And there
places,
were no
even in the United
hospitals or
States.
yeah, exactly. And there are no hospitals or clinics and birthing centers. And the
Right, my
older
grandfather
women,
was born on the kitchen table, like in his house in a farm in
yeah,
California, like,
yeah,
yeah,
it's wonderful. My daughter, our granddaughter Natalie, who's about 4 now, she was born on the kitchen floor because my daughter got in the car to go and ran back in the house and said, "I'm not going to make it." And baby
yeah,
was born on the kitchen floor. So, but the older women who had children and their daughters had children, they knew what to do.
yep.
And so they would be there to help and to assist it because they knew exactly what to do and they had experienced it themselves. So the midwife, and in Exodus, the Bible mentions midwives frequently because even in Exodus, remember the Pharaoh told them to kill the baby boys because he was afraid of the power of the Israelite people. And it says, so God, the midwives did not listen to Pharaoh, but they gave birth to the boys. So there's midwives again. So a lot of times we see about midwives in the Bible. Now that's number 7. Now number 8, we come to the pinnacle of the whole thing, the baby Jesus.
Yep.
And the incarnation, the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and
Flesh.
dwelt among us. And the word dwelt, that he dwelt among us, is an interesting word because it's really the word tent. He tented among us, tabernacled. And it's a picture back in the wilderness when they came out of the land of Egypt. Moses built a tabernacle
Yeah.
and it was put in a tent, and the
I've never
glory of
heard that.
God came down on the Ark of the Covenant.
Mhm.
When Jesus comes down, the second person of the Trinity, he takes a tent. It really means that Jesus came down and set up a tent for himself, the human body. His body became the tabernacle. So it's a picture of the Old Testament. The tabernacle is the outer part, the glory and the presence of God is the inner part. The same with Jesus. He's got his tent that he's dwelling
Steve, this is
in.
why I love listening to you because I have never ever heard that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So if you look up the Greek word, it'll oftentimes say that Jesus pitched his tent among us, or he
Gotcha.
tented. So, so St. Augustine wrote, Jesus the Son was begotten of a father without a mother, born of a mother without a father. Without a mother, he is God. Without a father, he is man. Now
Hmm.
that quote of Augustine. It was a Christmas nativity homily that he gave. It's much longer than what I just read, but it's
Right.
really amazing. This the contrast, the parallels. Jesus the Son was begotten of a father without a mother. He's the only begotten Son of the
Son of
Father,
God. Right.
long before Mary was his mother. And he was born of a mother without an earthly father. And he is God, and without a mother, he is God. And without a father, he is man. So Jesus is a big conundrum. And that's why
Yeah.
the heresies, all the heresies of the
Still
first 5 centuries,
today.
yeah, they do. You still have
It's
Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses come
yeah.
knocking on your door. And so he is he's a very big conundrum, and that's what all the heresies swirling around for the first 5 centuries especially is: how can God be man and how can man be God? Either he's God, but he's got this kind of a phantom body, or he's really a man that somehow God's presence came onto. But the church has always said, no, he's 100% God and 100% man, which is
Right.
why we call Mary the mother of God. In
Right.
431, she was declared the Theotokos in Ephesus, the Third Ecumenical Council. That is a statement that affirms both his divinity and his humanity. Because if Mary's the mother of God, that means she gave birth to a divine son. If
Right.
he's her son, then he's also human. So
Yeah,
anyway,
and I think that's a key thing for everyone trying to figure Mary out. Everything that the Catholic Church that we profess about Mary is really actually about Christ. It's not it is about her, but it's really pointing back towards Christ. It's
yep,
not
everything
just
we say
her.
about Mary, she's like the moat around a castle. And you have the Marian dogmas are there to protect the king and who he is, and
Yep.
they define who he is. You're exactly right. Well, watching the time here, we're doing pretty good.
Yep.
The next one is the manger. Number 9, the thing at the nativity is the manger, which is in French, mangeure means dish or food dish. And a manger is a place where animals eat. And in a way, you can say it's probably one of the most unsanitary places. How many mothers listening to us right now
Right.
wrap their baby up and put them in a food dish where sheep eat? And sheep, when they eat, I lived on a little farm, and when animals eat, saliva's coming out of their mouth, and
I'm
it's a
sure they tried
slobber.
to clean it, but still, that's gross.
It's a slobbery mess, and it's not the sanitized place that you give birth to a baby today in a hospital. They're careful to sanitize everything and rubber gloves and no germs.
Mhm.
And this is a very unsanitary thing. And you're in a cave. And when we're in, by the way, when we go into these caves, like the word Mary was born, I always say that in these caves, you always found 3 things. You found a roof covered with soot from all the years and years of fires that were in those caves, especially when they brought animals in. You also find a place where a fire was. Even today, the shepherds take sheep in there, and you can see where the fire was a week ago. But you also find on the ground little things that look like raisins, but they're not. It's where the sheep go to the bathroom in there,
Yeah.
and it's little pellets all over. Well, this is the kind of place where Jesus was born. You would think the king of the universe, the king of the Jews, would be born in a beautiful palace, but no, he's very humble. He hides himself in simple manner. And another interesting thing about the manger is, why would Mary put him in the manger? And I think it's got to do with the fact that manger is a place where sheep come to eat, and we're the sheep of God's pasture. I think Mary's telling us in advance that he's going to become your food.
Yeah. He's going
And
to become the Eucharist.
when I look at the altar in a church now, I don't just see a table, an altar of sacrifice and a table of communion with our Lord. I look at the altar in a church and I see a manger with a baby, and it's saying, I've become your food.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, now we'll go to number 10. We're halfway through.
This has been
Shepherds.
fascinating. And we're only halfway through. I'm loving this.
We got now shepherds. These are the lowest on the economic scale. They are not the owners of the sheep, they are hirelings. The owners of the sheep are wealthy with have flocks. They stay in Bethlehem. and they hire people to go out and stay for a week or 2 weeks at a time with the sheep. They don't bring the sheep back and forth because you want sheep to get fat. You bring them back and forth, they're going to get skinny. And
Yep.
there, Shepherd's Field today, where we have Mass, it's one of our stops when we take our groups to Israel, is about 2 miles east of Bethlehem. You go down into a valley, and down there's all fields. It still is today. And the caves are there. They'd bring the sheep into the caves at night for protection, and it's warm in the winter, cool in the summer. And by the way, I know that we've heard that Christmas could not be the 25th of December because it's cold and they couldn't bring the sheep out in the winter like that. Well, whoever came up with that idea must have been born in Minnesota or Michigan like me, because the average temperature in Bethlehem in December is between 40 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
So
Cold for there.
Yeah, it's
Like,
chilly
they think
for
it's
there,
cold.
but
Yeah.
it's not. I've had snowball fights with the Palestinian kids in the winter, but the snow is rare and it melts right away. But anyway, the shepherds are out there. I got a little question. It's fun for people to know. Why were the shepherds the first ones to be told about the birth of Jesus? It wasn't the rich men. It wasn't the king. It wasn't anybody. It was the poorest of the poor, the shepherds. Why
Yeah.
the shepherds? Because shepherds are always the first ones to know about the birth of a lamb.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense.
And
Because
they
they're
are
the
the
ones that are
first to
going to
know.
be there to birth the lamb, to help.
That's right. So
Yeah.
they're the first to know about the birth of a lamb born in a place where sheep are born. So the shepherds were out in the fields about 2 miles away, and they were shocked. It says they were frightened. Well, I guess so. Imagine you've never seen a movie, you've never been to a concert, you never heard fireworks. You just spend your time out in this field, and it's
The
dark and
quiet
quiet and cold.
wilderness.
And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, boom, the sky opens up and angels start singing like in a huge choir. And of course, they're shocked. I mean, it'd be stunning. It'd be very unsettling. And so they're out there, they hear this and they come, the news, and they come rushing back. Now, in Shepherd's Field, where we have Mass at the cave, there's a church called the Chapel of the Angels. And there's 3 paintings there, and they're very fun because each one has a dog. The dog is in each one of those paintings in Shepherd's Field. The first one is of the shepherds like this, getting the announcement, the angels, and the dog is afraid, so he's barking at the angels. He doesn't
Right.
like the angels. He's barking at them. The next one is them at the cave of the birth, and they're adoring Jesus, and the dog is also like adoring Jesus with them. And then the third picture is them all dancing and rejoicing on their way back out to the sheep, and the dog, he's dancing and rejoicing with them. So when I'm
Okay,
with my
that's
groups, I
fantastic.
make sure you see the dog in each one of those pictures.
So
So that deals with the shepherds.
every time my kids read the story, I don't know why we looked at it, but you know how on the, what is that Bible app that you can get on your phone where you can look up all the different translations and everything, and the Message, which is an awful, like, I don't even know. I didn't even like that translation when it came out in the 90s, when I was still a Protestant. But anyways, it says there were shepherds camping in the neighborhood. It says in there. And so every time we get to this part of the story of the nativity, my young always goes, and they were in the neighborhood. And I'm like, this is the worst translation ever. But sorry,
No,
let's keep going.
all right. Well, the shepherds are important.
Yeah.
Then we come to the angels. There were shepherds in the field keeping watch of their flock, and an angel, singular, appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were filled with great fear. And the announcement comes, and then suddenly there was with the singular angel a multitude of the heavenly hosts. So the first angel comes and gives them the announcement, and then all of a sudden, heavens open up, and there's a multitude of angels singing glory to God in the highest. And when the angels went away back up into heaven, and they said, "Let's go see this thing." And they went and found him. Now, they've been waiting, the Jewish people, Israelites, I should say. The word Jew comes from the tribe of Judah,
Yeah.
which was one of the 12 tribes.
Yep.
So when the northern 10 tribes were taken away into Assyria, they disappeared. The only tribe left really was Judah. And that's where we get the word Judaism and Jew. So Jew really means someone from the tribe of Judah.
Yep.
So when we're speaking before that time, it's the Israelites, because that's all 12 tribes. But then when it becomes just the tribe of Judah left, then we call them the Jews. But anyway, that's a little interesting information. The angels, the waiting for the coming of the Messiah has been all the way back since the Garden of Eden, when God said to them, there will be enmity between you and the woman, and between her seed and your seed. And there's the prophecy that there's going to be coming one to destroy the devil. And so now they're finally seeing that happen. That's what the announcement is. So imagine you've been waiting for something for thousands of years, and the announcement is it's here now. So that was exciting. Now the Magi, these are guys, one thing I do know about the Magi is they had good eyesight because they watched the stars. And if I go out at night and take off my glasses, I'm not going to see a whole lot of stars.
Right.
So they didn't have glasses back in those days, or telescopes. So they must have had good eyesight to be observers of the stars. Now, some people think they came from Petra, which is in Jordan of today. Father Dwight Longenecker has a book about that, and he argues convincingly that they came from there. But the traditional view is that they came from Persia, over in what's Iran and Iraq of today.
Right.
Which meant that they would have traveled over 1,000 miles. And they were considered to be wise men. It never says anything about kings, but they were wise men, astronomers who watched the stars, who read the world around them. And we could do a whole show on that, but they came to over 1,000, probably 1,600 miles. They came from Mesopotamia area. Matthew doesn't mention how many there are. Just the wise men came. So why do we always have 3? Why are there always in tradition? There's
Trinity.
been well, it's the
we always
3
kind
gifts.
of do things in threes. Yeah.
Yep. And they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So the assumption is, one guy had a whole bunch of gold on his camel, and another guy had a whole bunch of frankincense and a bunch of myrrh. But so each one brought one gift. We don't know. In ancient tradition, in ancient tradition, there was as few as 2 and as many as 13. So we don't know how many wise men came, but 3 is a good number. It works. It makes it easier when you have a nativity scene. If there were 13, it would make it a little more cumbersome with the nativity scenes. So we have 3. Christian legend gives them the names Balthazar, Gaspar, and Melchior. And that's the name that they basically have. And according to Herodotus, that's 484 BC, Magi were members of a Persian priestly caste specializing in astrology, interpretation of dreams, and magic. And the Greek word magos, which is what we read in our Bible, had supernatural knowledge and ability, and sometimes practiced magic or interpreted dreams. So, but they're mysterious folks. But they came from the east, and this was a symbol because the Old Testament said that they're going to come with their dromedaries, with their camels. And here we now see them coming to visit. They went to see Herod, but we'll talk about that one in a minute too. So number 13 is the star. It says the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And I know there's a lot of speculation today that the planets Jupiter and Mars and Saturn all conjoined, and it made a bright star, and it gave them the signal that something was going on, and they followed it. I don't buy into those things. I don't think it had to be some natural phenomenon. It says that the star it rose and went before them. It's like some even think it might have been a bright angel that was actually going before them. It was moving with them.
I've even heard people talk about it being possibly a comet, but
comets go boom, and then they go away. And it says, and it came to rest over the place where the babe was. a comet doesn't fly through the sky and then
And
come down
stop.
and rest
Yeah.
over the over the manger, you know. So I think the star, in my mind, it was a supernatural light, whether an angel, a comet directed by God, or some supernatural light that God used to bring these guys here. But the star is, I think, significant. And the first painting or image we ever have of Mary with baby Jesus, there's a star in it
Hmm.
there. So now we come to another interesting verse. I'm going to read the verse and then I'll tell what this number 14 is. The wise men, the Magi, have now come. They've talked to Herod. And it said, and after coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshiped him, and they gave him the three gifts. But I want to point out that it says after coming into the house, because they gave birth at a place where there was a manger,
Right.
which would have been a cave where animals were. Now it seems that they had moved out of that, and Joseph found a more suitable house for them to live in,
Yep.
and they would have gone into the house. Now, according to very ancient times, and about a 10-minute walk, if you leave the Church of Nativity today, you go out through that little short door we talked about, and you go east about 10 minutes. You walk through a whole gauntlet of vendors and souvenir shops. But you come to a church called the Milk Grotto, and it's run by the Franciscans. And if you go in and talk to the Franciscan there, he'll tell you that this is where the Holy Family moved after they left the church, the Nativity Cave. They moved into this, and when you walk in, all of the whole cave is like a house, and it's all white. The whole inside, if you scratch the inside of the cave, it's white powder. It's called the Milk Grotto because the tradition says that Mary was breastfeeding baby Jesus, and a drop of milk fell to the ground, and the cave miraculously turned white.
Wow.
And even to this day, if you go there, there's a museum, a gift shop, but there's also a museum, and you walk in and you see the walls covered with pictures of babies. And the reason is because people come there to pray for a baby that cannot have a baby, who are infertile, or mothers who do not have milk for their baby. And what you can buy, and I have 100 packs of these because people ask me for them all the time. So last time I was there, I got a bunch of these little packets of that white powder in a bag, and there's a prayer that goes along with it. And you put a little bit of that in your coffee in the morning, and you say the prayer. And the women that have had babies as a result, there's thousands of testimonials there of
Yeah.
women who could not have babies, but because of the prayers there in that white powder of that cave, they now have had a baby and can feed the baby. So anyway, that's called the Milk Grotto, 10 minutes from the birth cave. And that is where, according to tradition and the Franciscans, who are the caretakers of the holy sites in the Holy Land, I will tell you that that is the house that the wise men came to when they met Mary. See how interesting all this stuff is?
It is.
Are you ready for 15? We're short on time here, about
Yep.
10 minutes.
We'll
I'll
speed up a
kind of
little bit, I
zoom.
guess.
I'll zoom through these. Okay, the gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold represents the kingship. Frankincense represents his priesthood. Incense in the temple,
Yep.
even incense in the church day. But myrrh is very strange because myrrh is an herb that you use to embalm dead bodies. It's very expensive, but it's used for the embalming of a baby. So it's kind of like when you have a baby and you go to visit the baby, somebody brings him a baby doll, somebody brings him a toy, and somebody brings him his coffin.
Yeah. That is weird. Okay.
And it's kind of a prediction, a preparation for the death and burial of Jesus. Now, one other thing
Yeah.
about these gifts that are significant is this was a poor family. I don't have time to go through the biblical proofs of that, but just take my word for it. They were not a wealthy family. Joseph did not have a Visa card to pay
Right.
for his trip to Egypt and back and say, I'll pay it off later. Where did Joseph, who was a poor man, who didn't even have enough money to buy a lamb for the presentation, he had to use turtle doves instead, which are
Yep.
cheap. How did he afford the trip to Egypt and back? I think that God provided the financial resources with these three gifts, which would have been worth thousands of dollars in our terms, even more.
Yep.
So those gifts. Now, animals, there's no mention of cows and sheep and donkeys and things at the birth of Jesus, but we do know that animals were everywhere. And I have pictures. I sent you one of the entrance into the city of Jerusalem with all kinds of donkeys and camels and people camping and the streets of Jerusalem. There was no plumbing. Animals were all through the streets of Jerusalem, camels and donkeys. You can imagine what was on the road that you're walking on. That's why they always talk about washing feet in the Bible, because you're always walking through animal dung. So the animals. Now we come to the townspeople. I'm going to skip over that one because the people would have been aware of this, because wise men came, angels came, shepherds told them about this, baby boys died. The whole town people knew about this and got involved in the celebration and in the whole event because it was happening in their town, and towns were small back then.
Yep.
King Herod, the evil, wicked king who was ruthless, he lied and tried to deceive these wise men into coming back and telling him where the baby was so he could go kill him. But they deceived him, and they went back without telling him. So after King Herod, number 18, we come to the innocents, the death of the innocents. And they were killed. 2 points I'd make about this. It was a sorrow for Mary that this happened, because not only is Mary pro-life and hated the idea of baby boys. We don't know how many, some of them say thousands, but the village was small. John the Baptist was also subject to that because he was living in Ein Kerem, which is only a few miles away from Bethlehem.
Right.
And there in the Proto-Evangelium of James again, it says that an angel hid him behind a rock to protect him from the soldiers when they came through that area, the whole surrounding area of Bethlehem. And there's a rock there at the Church of Visitation today that everybody touches their rosaries to. That is the rock that is traditionally the one Joseph was hidden behind. Now, those innocents were not martyrs like other martyrs who died because of Christ. These martyrs died in the place of Christ. Right. Herod was killing them because he thought one of them was the king. So they were killed in the place of Christ. And just imagine Mary, after that happened, comes back from Egypt. She's still holding her baby. She comes back through Bethlehem, and there's all those women that lost their babies because of her baby.
Yeah.
That's a sorrow for Mary. That would be hard. Okay, that's the innocents. And by the way, there's a memorial with bones in it that is in the caves under the church of Nativity, next to the cave where Jesus was born. That is a memorial for the Cave of the Innocents, and there's baby skulls and things, and they say that some of those are from the innocents that were killed there. So that's number 19, and then we end with number 20, which is the devil. The devil is always hovering over everything related to the work of God, trying to destroy it. Did Satan know and understand what was going on? He was working through Herod. We don't know what the devil knew and didn't know, but I like this passage. Whatever it was, he got bamboozled. I love it that every time he tries to do something, his grand schemes always get
His
twisted.
Greatest triumph was his defeat.
That's exactly right. In 1 Corinthians, Paul says the hidden wisdom which God predestined before the ages to our glory, the wisdom which none of the rulers of this age has understood. For if they had understood it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. So the point here being is that it seemed now that rulers of the age, some say that that's the kings and the rulers. Others think that that is also, and probably is both, also Satan and the rulers of this world. Because it says that Satan is the god of this world. And had he known what was actually happening, I think he was always one step behind. And but you remember the movie of Mel Gibson? The devil always was watching Mary. Whenever Mary was walking, the devil would he'd just watch her go through the crowds, and you could see in his eyes, there's something about that woman. She must be the woman who's going to, at the end of time,
be more glory than me. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the one about going to crush my head. So he knew what was going on. But I think that Ignatius of Antioch says that the birth of our Lord was one of the mysteries that Satan missed. And so
Mhm.
here we have the 20 that we've gone through. We had time to do it. The 20 people and things at the Nativity, which I think kind of shows all of the interplay and all of the things going on in this event.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been fascinating because I think a lot of times we keep it simple, especially when you have little kids, right? And you're doing like Advent, we're reading scripture every night, and but we're keeping it really simple. And but there was so much going on. There's so
Yep.
many different things at play, and I mean, all the different aspects of the culture back then, it plays into that too, with the way people lived, how they would interact. I just think it's one of those, it truly is an amazing story, and we are so blessed that God uh became flesh and came down, and the risks that he went through, and just and the way that you're right, it's like the devil was one step behind, right? Like there's this book my children that I read to my youngest. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like these kids get to go back in time to different places and kind of live there for a minute. They're modern. Man, I wish I could remember it, but there's one book on the nativity, and they get to go see. Obviously, the timing's not right because it's like Mary the it's a little bit after the birth, but they end up going into they end up sneaking into the temple with the wise men to hear King Jared say that he's going to go kill Jesus, and then they meet up with the wise men and go see Jesus and get to see him, and then they're, oh no, we need to warn them that Herod's coming, and they run back and they're already gone because the angel of the Lord had come and warned Joseph that they need to
Interesting.
leave,
Yeah.
like it, but it helps kids see like, oh, this was really dangerous. Like this wasn't
Yeah.
just, we make it all like, oh, nice and soft, but it really was a trying time. And
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine being, as a father, being Joseph in this situation. I
That's
mean,
very rustic, very primitive, and very dangerous. And life then was very precarious.
it was. And to be like, man, this is God that I'm protecting.
Yeah.
Like I'm our, like, even in our world today, we're being fathers and grandfather, you're worried to protect your children.
Oh, yeah.
Like you just are. But to be like, wow, everyone's trying to kill this kid. I need to protect him. We got to flee to Egypt. We got, like it's just amazing. This whole scene. And so thank
Yeah.
you so much for taking this hour to
You're welcome.
walk us through all of these different places and things and kind of help explain it and expand this image that we have of what really happened during the
Yep.
nativity. So I
And
thank you so much.
anybody wants to go and see it for themselves, let me know. Go to our website, Catholic Convert. I hope if you can put it up at the bottom
Yep.
of the screen. Catholic Convert, and there's a big pilgrimage banner. Click on that because we are hoping to go back in March. We're going to kind of make a decision the first part of January. It'll be kind of a flash trip. Whoever can go and quick sign up and we'll go. But we do have 3 trips planned next fall as well. And normally we take 7 trips a year to the Holy Land. Because of the war, we've lost 16 trips. Believe that?
Yeah.
16 trips because of this war. But we're going back.
Yeah,
They can't keep us away. We'll go back.
for
And we're
sure.
going back to see the Lord, land of our Lord and Lady. If anybody wants to go, we also have a nice trip coming up to Poland in April, and we're
Okay.
going to see all the holy saints there, and that's a great trip. We're going to have Divine Mercy Sunday at the Chapel of the Divine Mercy on that day with the Sisters of Maria Faustina in Poland.
Okay. Wow, that's going to be amazing.
So yeah,
Yeah,
so CatholicConvert.com.
I'll have all your links in the description below.
Well,
So
thanks.
definitely, anyone, if you're interested in going on any of these pilgrimage with Steve, click the link and you can sign up and see everything he's got going on. It's got, his website's fabulous. If you want to read, you've got so many articles on there. It's like a whole library of wealth that you've added to your site. So I definitely, whenever I'm making videos, I'm like, oh, let's see what Steve says about this topic, and I'll look and see. I'm like, okay, yeah, that matches what. So
Well,
yeah,
good.
I
Well,
really
thank you,
appreciate
Brian.
you. Yeah.
Enjoyed being with you today, and have a very Merry Christmas.
Yes, you too. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and enjoy the family with this Christmas season. And congratulations on your first grandson getting married, and the next one coming down the pipe soon. So the Ray clan is growing, and it's
Yep.
fabulous to see. So
Well, thank you, Brian.
thank you very much.